I'm talking to you twice a year, I could be your best friend easy for 30 years.
Oh.
Women tend to be more dyadic in their relationships, meaning one-to-one. And so that naturally creates more intimacy because it's just me and you. So there's a higher chance that we're gonna have friction because you are so deeply involved in my life.
Growing my business, crossing seven figures, it feels like when I got on the other side of that all of a sudden there was this shift in my friendships.
Because whenever you cross over to a 6-figure, 7-figure entrepreneur, there's gonna be a shift in your time, in your interests, in your identity, in your expectations. Those things are all going to change. And so it's almost like we have to renegotiate the unspoken terms of the friendship we signed on for. That can be hard.
Welcome back to another episode of the Seven Figure Educator podcast. My name is Dr. Erica Jordan Thomas. I am a former teacher, former principal, Harvard grad turned full-time entrepreneur. I am CEO and founder of Seven Figure Educator, where we help educators just like you monetize their brilliance into a seven-figure education consulting business. I'm super excited about today's episode because this is a special one that I'm going to be honest with you. I'm like, I don't know who else can have these types of conversations because I feel like I'm sitting with a little bit of a unicorn. I have the opportunity today to be joined by Danielle Bayard Jackson, who is the author of Fighting for Our Friendships. And not only is she a relational health expert, but she is also one of us. She used to be a teacher. And so we are going to spend today jumping into a conversation about her story and her area of expertise around navigating friendships. So let's welcome Danielle to the podcast. Welcome.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited you're here. So first off, like I said, you're one of us. You are a former teacher, and let's first off, before we kind of like dive into that and then dive into your role now as a relationship health educator, define for the audience what that looks like of a relational health educator. What does that mean? And give people context because I think it's fascinating your background and how that ties to what you do today.
Yeah, so, I used to call myself a friendship coach, and people immediately knew, oh, I understand what's going on. But I think sometimes we see friendship as like a frivolous, extra recreational type thing. And I don't think it helps us to totally understand the importance, the urgency, the significance of it. And so the idea is that you have different domains of your overall health and wellness. And so physical health is one of them. We are now really familiar with the idea of mental health, right? But 25 years ago, people weren't walking around talking about mental health in a day-to-day conversation. But now that's common. Well, the hope is that we're using the phrase relational health the same way, because this speaks to the way that you perceive, form, and maintain platonic relationships. And that requires certain skills and abilities. So how do I form connections from scratch? How do I deepen relationships? How do I navigate conflict? Those are skills. And they literally impact your physical, mental, and emotional health. And so showing people research-based strategies around how to improve their relational health, that's what I've been doing for about the past 6-7 years or so.
Oh, wow. And I first knew your work as a relational health expert. And then I was like, oh, wait, she was a high school teacher. And then I was like, oh my God, it makes sense because where else is the battleground for like relational health than in like a high school classroom? And so talk to us around your journey of that transition from classroom teacher to what you do now. But it sounds like a part of that experience has really shaped the work that you're doing now. So would love to kind of hear more about that.
100%. Yeah. I got into teaching shortly after graduating from college. And I taught, 11th and 12th grade, okay, English class. And I didn't know it at the time, but it kind of felt like having my own unofficial sociology lab, because you have a front row seat to the ways in which issues of connection and belonging impact everything else. So, grades are one thing, but if you feel like you don't have somebody in school, in class, if you feel like you are not understood or you're having a fallout with a friend, I've seen that impact their attendance, their attitude, their confidence, and sometimes their academic success. Okay. So I'm studying and watching, especially the young girls, try to navigate relationships with one another. You're learning from experience what to say, what not to say. They're forming alliances, alliances are dissolving. And I often joke that I had like the proof, because on my seating charts, I had like the paper seating charts, you know.
Yes.
So,
Oh, take us back.
I had
Mm-hmm.
the pencil eraser marks to prove it, right?
Mm.
So you're in a group one day and the next day after class, it's like, I can't sit here. Can so all of that, but those are relational dynamics that they were trying to figure out. And then I got promoted to the chair of the department. And so we're leading meetings and identifying commonalities in our experience. So we're realizing at some point we can't even give good instruction if they're not talking to one another, collaborating effectively, they're not speaking. So it impacted more than we realized. And after about 6 years, I left the classroom to get into public relations. And I always joke that I made the foolish mistake of thinking, oh, I'm leaving that teenage drama behind, you know? And so I'm working with these charismatic, high achieving women, much like yourself, right? And from the outside, you think, oh, she's killing it. And she has no shortage of connections. The issue is a lack of satisfaction privately behind the scenes. But I'm not going to lead with that as a successful woman, because that detracts from the reputation I want to have as a self-sufficient woman. So how am I going to admit that I'm actually really dissatisfied with the people in my life? And so over the past 6 years, I've been leveraging my background in education to study, what does the research have to say about women's cooperation, communication, and conflict?
Mm. So you narrowed down on women friendships,
Mhm.
which leads to this assumption that there's a difference between women's friendships and men's friendship, which I read the book, so I
Mhm.
know there is. I don't know how you define it, but I think this is a great kind of like starting place for this of like, given your research, like what is the difference between how women engage in friendship and how men engage in friendship?
There are so many. And I want to start by saying, at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. We
Mm-hmm.
all want to feel seen. We want people who we can do life with, we can laugh with. It offers a sense of ease and refuge to our life. So we all want that, and we all need that.
Mm-hmm.
But there are ways in which we engage differently in our friendships. The first is the level of platonic intimacy that we often experience in friendship. Now, I'm not saying that men can't, many of them do, and they should. But I mean, this is a result of like a multiple factors, how we're socialized, certain cultural expectations, right? But women tend to be more dyadic in their relationships, meaning one to one. And so that naturally creates more intimacy because it's just me and you,
Mm-hmm.
okay? Men tend to run in circles with more people, but when you're in a larger group, it affords you a certain level of anonymity. So I can joke, I can kind of, not show up emotionally, and that's okay because there's a lot of us, it kind of diffuses the responsibility and expectation of sharing. Um, and our conversations. There's research that came out, I would say maybe about 3 years ago, and they found that even the things we talk about, and so women are more likely than men to talk about family, work, physical health, and mental health. All of those things center the self. So again, that's making us closer because I'm bringing my full self here. For men, they are more likely than women to talk about sports and current events. Nothing wrong with that, but those things decenter the self. So of course we can all talk about all those things, right? But women tend to be closer. Now their friendships, women are more fragile and they dissolve at a faster rate. And so this is typically where people say, it's because y'all are petty. Like exactly, because
Mm-hmm.
women are so catty.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that. It's like an easy reach to say, like, it's because you guys have issues. And we do sometimes. But what's really going on is the research tells us that women tend to integrate their friends into their lives to the degree of a sibling, men to the degree of a cousin. So for my girlfriends, you are in my business. You are sharing resources with me, praying together, helping me with work stuff, praying for my health. I mean, you're like this. So there's a higher chance that we're going to have friction because you are so deeply involved in my life. But if I'm talking to you twice a year, I could be your best friend easy for 30 years. I talk to you once a quarter and I'm like, that's my bestie. But our relationship looks totally different. So maybe there's a bit less risk there. So, there's no comparison in terms of one being superior to the other. They're just different in terms of the expectations, how we engage. And the last thing I'll say is, you often hear women have the running joke about, your husband or boyfriend goes to the barbershop and he comes back and he's like, oh yeah, Todd and Janet broke up. And you're like, oh my God, why?
Mhm.
I don't know. I didn't ask. And it's like, I don't know how that's possible, right? But it's like a common thing and it's a running joke because sometimes those details are kept out and it's a reflection of their intimacy. And so there are differences in the things we talk about, expectations we have in the friendship. And I think honestly, we can learn a lot from each other and how we
Mhm.
navigate those things, but there are differences.
I love this analogy of women position friendships like siblings
Hmm.
and men positioning friendships like a cousin relationship where, and I think it's a great framing of like there's no value judgment, but understanding then what nuances does that bring into the relationship
Right.
from an intimacy standpoint, from a when things don't go well, like what does that look like? What is the kind of reverb that happens as a result if I've deeply integrated you into my life and we've
Hmm.
had this level of secrecy and now there's a breach? Like there's this different level of reverb
Hmm.
versus we just go to happy hour together. And so I think that puts into perspective, I think, why there's a lot of uh, cultural and societal narratives around women friendship that sometimes, like you said, is like, wait a minute, we ain't petty.
Hmm.
Like we're just more deeply connected,
Hmm.
which I think brings a different nuance. There's something that I think you said in your book that it it was an interesting positioning for me that I hadn't heard before. Is this idea that it says it's a citation that feminist friendship is inherently a political practice of developing relationships marked by intimate bonds of understanding, care, and support that help us know how to show up for each other better across our differences. So, like this idea that friendship is actually liberatory, that it actually is an act of resistance against oppressive systems
Hmm.
of like strong, deep, intimate women relationships, I thought was like, oh, like this is an act of resistance. So
Yeah.
I just thought that was really interesting as a framing. Is that I'm curious if that was an intended approach as you were like kind of researching friendship, or if that was already like a natural lens that you had to friendship around like this liberatory aspect, or how did that come up as you were studying more around friendship?
Well, it's just interesting because when you learn about a lot of social justice movements, a lot of them start with two women who were friends. We
Mm,
were already talking to each other. We
mm,
share this passion. We are sharing similar life experiences and hardships, and we gather and we gather and we share resources and we help one another. And so I think so often we see these as two different things. Like I have my friends, and it's this fun recreational thing that I sometimes get to when I have the time. And then there's social justice work, and then there's resistance, then there's activism. And I can't be here exchanging ideas with people for a shared cause. And I don't have those skills in my most intimate relationships of hearing you when you have a completely different perspective, working together, relational resilience. But I expect to have that in these movements.
mm.
And oftentimes, these movements that we are working together on are an extension of people who are already in relationship with one another. So there definitely is a connection to those things. And that part has resonated with people, which I'm glad.
Mm. And you know what? It just makes me think about like this aha of like it helps put some of the like toxic messaging in perspective and actually like almost like a passive way that like oppression moves, because if we believe like friendship is actually liberatory,
Hmm.
then like oppression is actually going to tag it as something to minimize. So let's put all these toxic narratives around it of like women are petty or like mean girls or I
Hmm.
have trust issues or
Hmm.
I resonate more with men than women, which I know is something that you talk about in the
Hmm.
book too, where it just provides a different frame around those narratives of why they're actually so dangerous,
Hmm.
that it's actually positioning an attack on relational connection that at the end of the day is a blueprint for actually attacking oppression, which I think is a really, really helpful framing for the friendship conversation. So one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation on the podcast and want to start diving deeper into the content of the book, which first off, this book is fire. Like fire. And I mean, I didn't have expectations when I like read the book, but I think friendship is one of those things that I feel like oftentimes in like education systems, to me it feels like how we define culture. Like it's not
Mhm.
something that is like super tangible you can touch. So because of that, it's like hard to put language to or problem solve or action plan around because you can't touch or feel it, but it's a connection and it exists. And the way that you give language to friendship in this book, I think it's so genius and it makes it so much clearer around what makes friendship work and gives context to what's happening when there's a breach. It's not just, oh, I feel some kind of way.
Mhm.
Like there's actually a framework to approach it. And so, one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation and where I want to go with the conversation is I feel like for so many of my peers, and this even happened for myself in growing my business, crossing seven figures, it feels like when I got on the other side of that, that all of a sudden there was this shift in my friendships.
Mm.
And it's like I couldn't explain it. I didn't know what was happening. And I'm like, I don't feel like I'm different, but I think people view me differently. And so the way that you define relationships in the book, you say there's three mechanisms or three types of affinities that you name in the book. You talk about, I want to dive into the symmetry aspect
Mhm.
of this idea of symmetry because when I read that, I was like, oh, like that is actually a dynamic that can shift relationships. And I
Mhm.
think that's what might be at the root of this thing of why does everybody, when they cross this major milestone in business, all their relationships start shaking. So, talk to us around symmetry and what that means in relationships. Hey there, I'm popping in really quickly to make sure that you knew about my Seven Figure Business School. It doesn't happen often, but every once in a while, I teach live for 5 days straight. Baby, I'm still a teacher at heart, and it gives me so much joy to teach about the foundations of a seven-figure business. During the 5 days, I'll teach you how to package your offers, I'll teach you pricing, I'll teach you $1,000,000 sales that aren't salesy, and I'll teach you how to find folks to go and pitch your offers to immediately. So do not wait. Go ahead, head to the show notes, and I want you to click the link to sign up for our next business school. I'll see you there.
Well, first, I'm so glad that you are saying that you felt like the book gave you language because so often with friendship, and I've done it too, we tend to say things like, I just feel like the vibe shifted. I feel like she has an attitude. Things,
Right,
and it's just
right,
like,
right,
okay, I get what you're saying, but what
right,
does that even really mean? Or we sometimes it becomes very reductive and we don't honor the complexities of it. So we might say things like, oh, she switched up on me or she's so fake. And like maybe in some circumstances,
right.
but there's other things that are happening. And so, the past 6 years, as I'm looking at the research across disciplines, I was noticing the same three themes emerge. And I found that for women, they tend to prioritize three things in their friendships. Now, I'm not saying that men don't also value these
Mhm.
things, but for us, this is priority. And those three things are symmetry, support, and secrecy. And so, if a woman finds herself changing and her lifestyle is different and access and resources look different, it could be perceived as a threat to each of those three things. And so, symmetry is about egalitarianism, reciprocity, and a sense of sameness. Okay. Support refers to emotional help. And secrecy is not just about like literal secrets, but the essence of that.
Mm.
So, me and you being in this exclusive vault where we engage in mutual self disclosure. I share, you share, because that is the glue of women's
Mm.
friendships. So let's take this example of transitioning into, a seven-figure entrepreneur, whatever it is, right? I might find that my friend perceives this as a violation of the first affinity of symmetry because that sameness is different. Maybe she no longer feels like we're equal, right? I don't see myself as better, but she might perceive us as not being on the same level. And egalitarianism is really important for women. Or she might feel like certain things aren't reciprocal anymore, right? And then when it comes to support, we all know that we need support. And the research says it's the number one thing women look for in their same sex friendships. But the issue I've often noticed with that is we're not often articulating what that looks like.
Mm.
I just know that like my friend needs to support me.
Right,
What does that even mean?
right.
And what kind of support do you need now in this new season of your life? And as your friend, if we've known each other for 20 years, is my support still sufficient or do you need something new? And do I sense that and feel
Mhm.
threatened or left behind because of that? And then finally, secrecy, being in that vault where we're sharing. When you are transitioning into this new world, you might find that you are relating to others who have shared experiences. And you have a sense of ease with them because it's almost like y'all are speaking shorthand because they just get it, right? So as a friend, it's not like I can't offer support, but I don't know the shorthand. I don't know that world. I don't totally understand it. I don't share the same challenges. So maybe now you're sharing more outside the vault with these other friends, and we're doing less of it here. And so, yeah, that shift can definitely change the dynamics in a friendship.
And do you find that, because when I'm thinking about these shifts in the dynamics, like what does it look like to still maintain the friendship? So do you find that like people who work through that type of shift, that it's okay, we just in these, 3 different areas of symmetry, support, and secrecy, that if our symmetry gets off kilter a little bit, we just double down and support and secrecy, and that's what allows us to still stay connected? Or is it like a redefining of all the 3? Like, how do you found that when the symmetry starts to get off, because now at our core, what was the same is, and maybe core isn't the right word, but how we used to connect, or what we defined as the same, is now different. How have people worked through that? What has been the strategy in those 3 areas to still kind of remain intact?
Yeah, so a couple things can be helpful. The first is there's research that finds that you have successful relationships when you have perceived similarity more than actual similarity. So as long as y'all still see yourselves as the same in certain areas, that's what counts. So the more that you can remind yourself of the ways you are the same, the better, because it's really tempting to look at the changes and to start to I don't really ruminate over that. Things are so different, and she's not like she used to be, and we're not. And that's true. And I think a lot of us know intellectually that friendships are going to change. We all know that. But when they actually do, that's really hard. And it's hard not to begin othering your friend. I can't relate to her anymore. And so hopefully, things like the 3 affinities framework gives us a starting point to know, okay, I see what's changing here. So how do I recalibrate that? Because when there are changes, it doesn't mean the friendship is doomed. It just means, okay, we need to shift something so we feel like we're in sync. And truth be told, and this might not be like a feel good remark, but honestly, sometimes things will be off for a year, 2 years. I mean, sometimes I work with older women and it helps to give you perspective because they have lots of stories of friendships where you felt very aligned and it felt so natural, and things were clunky for like 2, 3 years. Somebody had kids, moved, got married. So there has to be space for that, right? And I feel like if a woman is going through that shift, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. This person can still be in my life, but I'm positioning myself to invite new connections into my life so I feel seen in certain ways that my friend can't offer. Because whenever you cross over to a 6-figure, 7-figure entrepreneur, there's going to be a shift in your time, in your interests, in your identity, in your expectations. Those things are all going to change. And so it's almost like we have to renegotiate the unspoken terms of the friendship we signed on for. And that can be hard.
So it makes me think of so me and my best friend, we've been best friends for 20 years, meaning we met freshman year of college. And I'm like, girl, the people we were freshman year of college is definitely not the same people we are now. And like the ebbs and flows that have happened over those 20 years, I think you even gave me language to like what makes this work. Because I mean, there was a time in our friendship where, I mean, we first off, we lived in the same city. So like that proximity from a support standpoint, I think that that helped enable, was a catalyst to support, just proximity. And also we were, young, she's now a mom. Back then she was single. And so like the spaciousness of time, I think allowed for those 3 things to really thrive. And then over time, as I moved out of my hometown, and as she went to law school, and that within itself maybe is a whole nother level of the trenches. And so it's interesting because you've given me language, and I think this is what's been really helpful about the book is like I think oftentimes, particularly when there's this level of intimacy and you don't have the conversation, it's easy to tag things as a personal thing of, oh, they're not calling me, or we're not talking as often. That's where like the fertile ground for assumptions.
Mhm.
And I was reflecting so much over that friendship that I've had for 20 years. I'm like, what made this work? And you're right. Like we had times where like we weren't proximate and we weren't talking on the phone, and we actually maybe even went weeks or maybe even months without
Mhm.
talking to each other. And even now in this stage of life, she's a new mom. I'm out here just head down deep in the business. And I think it's having, I think what you urge people in the book is like the introspection, but it's also like, how do you have the conversation around these
Mhm.
things? And I think that's what's been some of our saving grace in those moments, is having those conversations where she's like, you know what? I happen to be the one who's calling you a lot. Like, I think you should call me.
Mhm.
Like, how about next time you call me? Which I think is like such a beautiful way to give an invitation, and also like lovingly check someone of like, girl, like check
Sure.
on me too,
Yeah.
which is something you talk about in the book. So, here we have a couple of audience questions. And before we go to the audience questions, something that I wanted to unpack, which I mean, the structure of this book is just brilliant because there's like some archetypes and profiles of friends that you go through in the book, and kind
Mhm.
of almost like a roadmap for whether you're that friend, or like how to know if you're that friend, or if
Mhm.
you identify with having that friend. So give us like one to two of those profiles that you kind of outline in the book. And I'd be curious, like if there's one that's like most common that you see in your work.
Mhm.
Would love for you to talk about that.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you appreciate the format of the book. We were torn on how to approach that, but the first part of the book is more of an aerial view analysis to help women understand. Oh, I get the mechanics of women's friendships. So almost to train you to be a sociologist, right?
Mhm.
And then the second half of the book gets very on the ground level. If this situation's happening, here's some ways you might respond to that. And the idea of the archetypes was that you are that friend to somebody or have been at that point. So, for example, the love obsessed friend or the jealous
Girl, I know
friend or
her,
the
child.
and the
Yes.
truth is that there might be a woman at somewhere in your timeline and friendship history who experienced you that way. I
Mhm.
know there was for me, right?
Mhm.
I think that there are friends maybe I had in college who experienced me differently than
Mhm.
maybe friends now, right?
Mhm.
And that's their story of who I was as a
Mm.
friend. And so we tried to touch on what I saw as some of the most common conflicts that emerge between women. So the love obsessed one is a big one, feeling
Mhm.
like you were a placeholder until she got a love interest and
Mhm.
now you're, second place.
Mhm.
The jealous friend, which is has such a tricky one to navigate because no one even wants to admit that you suspect your friend of being jealous because it makes it look like you think
Mhm.
but that happens sometimes too. So we unpack
Mhm.
that. The friend who doesn't reciprocate. I'd probably say that's probably the top three issues that I hear
Mhm.
is I'm doing all the things. I am initiating, but other
Mhm.
people never. And it's just funny because if you walk into a room and say, okay, raise your hand if you feel like you're the one who's doing all the work in your friendship, everybody raises their hand. That math doesn't math. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? Like we
Mhm.
all are the one who, so that sometimes is a tricky one, is women feeling like I am the one who contributes and I'm over it, so I'm pulling back. So
Mhm.
that's a whole thing. And so we just wanted to kind of touch on certain archetypes. Oh, and another one was the newly changed friend. So having the friend and things are going well, and then she becomes a new person right in front of your eyes. How do we maintain the connection? Because it's an issue for us.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I feel like, so the change friend one resonated with me given this topic of like, as you evolve in business. And oftentimes, what I talk about is like entrepreneurship is like choosing an identity crisis. Where it's like you're choosing to literally shed like a version of you in order to grow your business. And so you essentially become what you call the change friends of like, in order for me to grow and elevate my business, I've
Mm-hmm.
got to be able to change. And there's the professional aspect of this, but also, at least for me, I'll speak for myself, like my personal life looks really different because I've had to delegate more in my personal
Mm.
life in order to create space, on the professional side. And so I think that's one that like deeply resonates with our audience of like this changed friend kind of persona. And one of the things that you kind of talk through in each of those archetypes or avatars is like okay, how do you know that's you? What if that's your other friend? And like, what does it actually look like to deal with this? And so if someone believes that they might be the changed
Mhm.
friend, what might be one or two strategies or things that they might do in order to protect and nurture a relationship when they know that they're actively changing and it might be challenging that support, secrecy, or
Mhm.
symmetry in a relationship?
One thing I would encourage people to avoid, and I know they mean well, but it tends to bring friction, is the way they frame that change. And so if we're using language like, I've outgrown that, I'm too good for that now, or whatever it is, but something to show I've elevated, and so that's why I can't connect anymore, that might be true for you, but I want you to think about how that's often received.
Mhm.
Right. Especially, so the example of like, oh, I don't drink anymore. That's just not for me. And they're like, girl, you 6 weeks ago. Okay.
You was
So
downing them, girl.
okay, so
What?
stop, right? So, so being careful around trying to defend the change because maybe you feel like they are coming on the offensive. They're telling you, oh, you used to be more fun or you used to be like this. So we defend, which is natural. But then if we're using language or framing that makes them feel like your choices are inferior and I've elevated, to be careful of how we word that because that might create a wedge of people thinking, oh, you think you're too good, right? Even though that's not the case. Another thing would be to call it out. I mean, you just spoke about communicating things, and it's so basic and we hear it all the time. But the truth is, we give ourselves permission to do that in every other relational context.
Mhm.
I anticipate conflict in my romantic relationship.
Mhm.
It's like, you need to sit down, let's
Mhm.
talk. I feel like we're not connecting.
Mhm.
But we do not do that in friendships. And a lot of times it's because we subscribe to the idea that I shouldn't have to. If you're my friend, you should know that, especially as a woman. You should know.
Mm.
So oftentimes she doesn't. And
Mhm.
so, I once heard Dr. Marissa Franco, who's a friendship expert, she says that friendships are the most ambiguous relationship you'll ever have.
Mm.
Sometimes I don't even know if we are friends. I know we got coffee and I enjoyed it, but like,
Mhm.
can I start saying like,
Are we
yeah,
associates? Are we friends?
what are we
Peers?
doing
Colleagues?
here? And so like, it's so ambiguous. So to me, that shows that the best way to navigate it would be to minimize the ambiguity as much as possible. So if I feel like there's a shift, it's my responsibility to reduce that gray area by saying like, hey, I know that things have been different lately and I've been like really obsessed with, XYZ lately. Can I introduce you to that world? Or do you want to come to a class with me? Or just let me geek out about it
Mhm.
sometimes, girl. Okay. Just give
Mhm.
me 10 minutes to
Mhm.
just like be a nerd. Right.
Mhm.
So I'm acknowledging it, but I'm saying it as like, it's an opportunity. Like I can share about my world and, just let me geek out if I want to, as opposed to we're so different lately and I just can't relate. But I'll end by saying I want to validate women who do feel like it's brought tension to their friendship. And one sociological concept is social identity support.
Mm.
And the idea is that we don't just look for friends that we like, we're looking for friends who see us the way we see ourselves. I want friends who see me how I see me.
Mm.
And it's a struggle when they don't. So if we grew up a certain way and now I identify differently, I need you to see me like that.
Mhm.
I don't necessarily need you to adopt the same identity, but I need you to see it in me.
Mhm.
One example I like to use is from the show Insecure. There was like when they started having their shift, Molly and Issa.
Mhm. Oh,
It's
girl.
because
Oh,
it's
girl.
because like Molly started to get really serious about Asian Bay, remember? And
Mhm.
then Issa was getting really serious about like her job because she left like her nonprofit. But they weren't clicking because they had never seen each other that way. So at one point Issa even said like, "Oh, really? Like this is going to be a serious relationship? Girl, come on, you know how you are."
Mhm.
But for her, that's who she wants to be now. Is a
Mhm.
serious girl who's serious with her man.
Mhm.
But your friend doesn't take you seriously in that. She
Mhm.
doesn't see you that way. And then Issa wants to be legit working woman. But you have your friend who's like, oh, come on, is this the job of the week?
Mhm.
And that feels so dismissive and invalidating. And so finding ways during those changes to communicate, I see you and I recognize you as a boss entrepreneur, as opposed to, oh, this is an act or some character you're trying on, because that is going to create a wedge if you don't see me how I see me.
Oh my gosh, that's so good. And I think that's another thing that gives me language to like the friendships that I've had that still feel like a soft place to land even
Mm-hmm.
as I'm changing. I think you hit the nail on the head of like they see me the way that I see myself, but also in like some ways it's like they see me bigger than what I see myself. They're like,
Mm,
girl, like,
yes.
you know, you could X line. I'm like, oh yeah, for real. Or they're just like, girl, this is just the beginning. And wait until this
Yeah.
happens. Like they're actually like facilitating me dreaming bigger.
Yeah.
That I think there's so many, I think there's a level of like self security, like respect, like honoring for the other person in the friendship that allows someone to be able to be in that space and
Mhm.
not feel, for lack of a better term, like threatened by
Yeah.
someone's change.
Yeah.
So I think that's really helpful language. We have a couple of questions because, like I said, I was excited to have you. So I was like, let me, I know people have questions. And so I couldn't keep the tea to myself. I'm like, y'all, guess who's coming? And what questions do you have about friendships? So we have a couple of questions that folks from the community submitted. And I think these are going to be great for us to talk through. So the first question is, what do you decide to withhold from certain friends and why? So it almost kind of sounds like a little secrecy criteria
Mm.
checklist a bit. And they go on to say, for instance, some of my friends know how much money my business is making, and others have no clue, but we're still cool.
Mhm.
So I'm curious to kind of hear your response to it because I don't want to add too much of my assumptions to it. But how do you decide to withhold? What do you decide to withhold from certain friends and why?
Yeah, a couple things to consider as you figure that out are um, first, what evidence have you gotten from each of these friends that it would be safe to share? Some people have shown you that they can be trusted to hold that information. And I'm not saying that others aren't trustworthy, but maybe they haven't demonstrated that they can, that that's a safe space to land with that. So what evidence have you gathered? And then also ask yourself about the purpose. So just because you're my friend doesn't mean you have to know this information. What would be the point of you sharing? Is it because you want to work on financial goals together? Is it because they also are in that industry and so you're trying to give each other like pay transparency so she knows what to expect for herself,
Mm.
right? So you can ask yourself, what would be the purpose? Has this person demonstrated in certain ways that it would be safe here? Those could be some things to figure out. And I don't think it makes a person secretive if you decide, I want to kind of hold this as something private to me. Is wise in some cases.
Mm. All right, we have the next question is actually, I just had a thought because I was sitting here thinking, I was like, oh, I think I just have all these ahas when I be talking to you, when I be reading your book, because you just give me another aha where I feel like I've said for a while, I'm like, I need more seven figure friends. And what I'm really saying is I need more symmetry. And so like, and so in hearing what you just said of like, what's the evidence that someone can be trusted with this type of information, which feels I think symmetry can be like a indicator of it, but also support. So I mean, this
Totally.
framework is like super powerful. But I think being able to have this language of the support, the secrecy, and symmetry, I think it helps people articulate what they really need
Yeah.
versus like I'm just saying I need more seven figure friends. But what am I actually saying?
Yes.
I'm saying that I'm looking for more sameness
Mm.
in this new change in my life where now I'm experiencing these new things that I've never experienced before.
Yeah.
I'm looking for other people who are also going through similar experiences. And the common denominator happens to be the stage of business,
Hmm.
but that's actually not the focus. It's actually the symmetry of what that experience is bringing.
Let me say that's so good, like the nuance of that, because I don't know if you've seen or said this, but I see it floating around is especially in the entrepreneurship world, people say things like, I need other women around me who are,
Right,
and I
right,
get it,
right,
right?
right,
I
right,
get it,
right,
right? I want women who like challenge
right,
me to my potential and all those
right,
things. But it's like, you also need variety in your
right.
social landscape. So I
Mm-hmm.
can appreciate saying, I need other women. We all need to be like this. If you're my friend circle, everybody's on this
Mm-hmm.
level financially, whatever. And I get it. But there are also downsides of that.
Mm-hmm.
Having nothing but entrepreneur friends.
Girl.
Okay. There sometimes can be competitiveness, or that's all we talk about all the time, or it doesn't allow me to feather out my other intersectional identities. I got
Mm-hmm.
other things going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I need a woman who's not in that world to help bring out these other parts of me that I can't in these spaces. And so I love that reflection that you just gave of, okay, what's underneath that desire that I have? What am I really looking for? I think is really important nuance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because when I connect with my friends that we were teachers together
Hmm.
or we were administrators together, there's this unique level of support
Mm.
that I I have support in other areas, but there's a different level of support where it's like you had this insight into this stage of my life,
Yeah.
and to know that you were there at this stage. We were riding in my Ford Focus with no air in North Carolina. and like, and
Yeah.
now you can pull up to my event. And when you want to volunteer, and I didn't ask,
Mm.
like there is a depth to that support to
Yeah.
where, and I think that's also a little bit of like the like slight paranoia of this stage of
Mhm.
like who wants to be proximate for superficial reasons,
Right.
right? And so I think that's also another kind of aha of just like why that support feels so special in that type of relationship. That just makes it worth kind of holding close. So this next question we have is, how do you manage friendships with the responsibilities of life and building a business? Hey, y'all. I want to take a quick moment to pop in. I know the episode's getting really, really juicy, but I could not miss the opportunity to make sure that you know that we are headed to Atlanta October 3rd through 5th for Seven Figure Educator Live. This is my 3-day live event. It is the only 3-day live event for education consultants who are out here making a big impact and getting a big bank. And even if you feel like your bank ain't that big yet, I want you in the room because that's how your bank gets bigger, okay? I have curated a very special 3-day agenda that includes powerhouse speakers, 7, 8, 9-figure speakers, intentional networking to find your people, to find your next opportunity. Y'all, we're getting ready to take the city over, and we're taking it over at a 5-star property, okay? Meet me in Atlanta October 3rd through 5th. Grab your ticket by heading to sevenfigureeducator.com. I'll link it in the show notes, and I'll see you there.
Mm. Mhm. This is going to be something that I think people in their 30s and 40s especially feel. The research tells us that people in this stage of life have the least amount of leisure time than any other generation. So you're literally working with fewer hours. This is a time when people are having children. Maybe you're caring for aging parents. Maybe you are doubling down at work because you're like, this is my time to shine and grow. So this is a really tricky time period. And they often refer to it as the friendship dip. So your social network grows and grows until about the age of 26, at which point it begins to decrease. And then there's like this little dip and it comes back up maybe like late 40s ish. Kids are out of the house, you're establishing the career, and now I get more time, right? So hold on, everybody who's struggling. Just hold on for 10 more years. And so that's a valid question of like, how do I find the time to balance all these things? The first thing I would say is, and I've heard others say this before about like, maybe balance looks like different seasons, not like I'm doing all the things every day or even every week. But I think also front loading conversations with people you feel like might be experiencing you as neglecting them. So I might say to friends like, girl, just heads up, the next month is about to be so crazy for me, but I cannot wait until fall because we deserve that trip. I cannot wait. That thought is getting me through. What I'm really offering you is reassurance because that's all people really care about. At the heart of my discontent is the questions, do you love me? Do I matter? Do you care? And so maybe I do not have the availability. People just need to hear me say, I see you. I see the distance, but life is lifing, but I cannot wait until we can connect. So sometimes that helps you to feel a sense of ease and knowing that everybody knows. So no one's misinterpreting your distance as a lack of care. That's typically the meaning we assign to you being absent is you don't care. So let me just tell you up front, it has nothing to do with that, right? So sometimes that can help. And then the last thing I would say too is the way that we think about hanging out with friends. I think for some of us, we need to update that. If you still think of hours long brunches when you think I need to get with my girls, you're going to continue to say I don't have time for friends because who said it has to be 4 hours brunches? Those are nice. But maybe it looks like instead of looking for additional hours, it looks like stacking the hours I already have. So if I do laundry religiously on Sundays, that's also the time I call my girl and we FaceTime and I just bake it in. Or running errands. Can that be sufficient? can I say, hey, I gotta go. I used to say to Target, I gotta go to Costco, right? And just come with me. Talk to me about your date last night while I go on these
Right,
errands. And so
right.
it's a little less sexy, but if you're struggling to find extra time, you might need to integrate your friends into your life so it doesn't feel like another thing that you have to do.
That's so good because one of the most meaningful like friendship connections that I had was with my best friend. She was walking to it. She had just parked her car, walking to a speaking engagement because it was at a university. So she was like had to walk to the building, and she called me while I happened to be like in the little VIP lounge at a Mary J. Blige concert before like going to my seat, and I'm in the corner like, "Hey, girl," and like it was like 10 to 15 minutes. So she was like, I'm walking to the speaking engagement. I wanted to call you real quick. I'm like, girl, I got 10 to 15 minutes before I got to get to my seat. And it's
Yes.
like you said, it's like really redefining what connection looks like. And I mean, I think that's just so powerful for our audience because how many of us are still operating from a definition of friendship that when we were 20 years old?
Correct.
Of like hang out all day or all night or on the phone for hours or even secrecy, right? Because I think that, in some relationships where it's like what types of business am I telling at different stages of life? I think that's really important to redefine. Okay, so let's kind of transition to a little bit of rapid fire to be able to put a bow on our time. And so, first, rapid fire. And when I say rapid fire, it's just like whatever comes to your mind. You can be as generative as possible. If it's one thing, if it's three things, if it's 8 things, whatever's on your heart for the rapid fire. Okay? Okay, so first, rapid fire is a friendship red flag you've ignored and wish you hadn't.
One friendship red flag I've ignored is having the friend who talks about everybody else but reassures me that I'm different and she's just telling me because I'm special. But she would never do that to me. She did. But, and now I know, so growth. Yeah.
I feel like a friendship red flag that I've ignored would be there's I feel like there's something around it. I don't know, maybe you got more specific language for it. But like I feel like there's particularly friends that I've had that have been entrepreneurs. There's like something that at the surface feels like inspiration, but then it turns into like admiration, where it's like, oh, I thought we were symmetrical, and then I realized, oh, you just put me on a pedestal, and like now I'm feeling a little uncomfortable because like
that's good.
And so like, and I don't know if I'm using the right language or if you have like a thought to kind of put that together, but there's moments where it's like, oh, now it doesn't feel safe to have the same level of secrecy than before because it's and I don't know, I feel like there's probably some psychological term where it's almost like I don't consider myself to be a celebrity at all, but it's almost like the celebrity effect where it's like, they're still everyday people, but the moment Beyonce walked down the street, I'm like, oh my God.
All right, that's so interesting. I know what you mean. I've had people before who'll say, "Oh, I know you from Instagram or whatever it is," and we end up chatting, and they do feel really cool, and I'm like, okay, she's so funny, she's so awesome. But sometimes you do think like, oh, if you are having preconceived ideas off of Instagram, I don't want to ruin the way that you see me by really getting comfortable. You know what I'm saying with you? Like I really am. And so that's interesting as a red flag. That's interesting because it's definitely something to look out for.
Yeah, or even just like your version of me is the version on Instagram.
Yeah.
And that's who you're friends with.
Yeah.
It's like you're friends with the Instagram version was like, oh, we just met. Like,
right.
Like, I mean, I'm happy to learn more about you, but it's like, oh, I didn't realize we were friends. Okay, what's your favorite boundary phrase?
Oh, like if I'm setting a boundary, how I say it. I like using affirmative boundaries.
Okay. Ooh, I like this.
Which is instead of emphasizing what I don't want to do, I emphasize what I do want to do with a smile. And I typically do it very playfully. That's my style. So let's say if all the girls want to, I don't know, go out really late. I don't know. Instead of saying like, no, I can't, that's not happening. I'll say, okay, well, I'm my best self before 7. So I'd really love if we could do like a before 7 situation.
Mm-hmm. Come on, day parties. Yes, we live for
So
a good
that
day
works
party.
for me, and it doesn't make people feel like they're rejected, but it just also communicates, what I'm comfortable with.
I love it.
Mhm.
So good. All right. And then our last one, what's one lesson about friendship you wish every entrepreneur knew?
Oh, um, that it's a process. It's never really something you ever just arrive at. There's research that finds that we replace half of our friends every 7 years.
Oh.
So, to some degree, it is worth learning the skill of inviting new friends in. How do you gracefully let a friend go? How do you communicate? Because it's going to continue to happen. So, for a person listening, if they are feeling any shame over not getting it right, if they are looking at other people and thinking, I don't have that kind of longevity in my friendships and internalizing that, what's wrong with me? If they are in a season of friendlessness because their lifestyle has changed and they're trying to attract people who are more aligned, I see so much shame and embarrassment for some people around having a friendship landscape that doesn't look how they want it to. But if you just give yourself permission to be exploratory and to learn, I think that it can be just a better experience. I think that we learn about ourselves through others. We do healing through community. It's just a process. And I think if people gave themselves permission to say, you know what, I'm figuring this out. I'm learning what I like. I'm learning who I vibe with. I'm growing. It becomes more of a fun experience to just explore your relationship with other people.
So good.
Yeah.
So good. How can people connect with you?
Yeah, so everything lives at betterfemalefriendships.com. And the goal, honestly, is just to share with women ways that they can enjoy more satisfaction in their friendships. I actually have rarely had the conversation around my transition from like educator to relational health educator. So even having this conversation is new for me, and I appreciate you for giving me space to talk about that transition. Um, I think what has been so cool about this whole journey is that when I left the classroom, I felt very sad. I felt very fearful because I thought, this is all that I can do. I don't know how to be anything but a teacher. And for so many of us, that is our identity. And so I stayed longer than I should have because I thought, I am not good enough to do something else. This is what I can do. And I believe that God divinely orchestrated my life so that I still am educating. It just looks different. And that He was using all those skills so that it could help me in what I'm doing today. And so, for people who are listening in transition, I'm just so excited for them. And I'm excited to see the ways that their skills will be used to bless people in a new way. And so, at betterfemalefriendships.com, that is my pivot. And so I feel like it's an honor to be able to show people how to have healthy friendships.
It's first off, this has been so good, such a joy, and I part of like my not so secret like belief in the world. I'm like, how much better would the world be if everybody was a former teacher?
Yeah.
Of just like the experience of what that builds in you, creates in you, manifests in you, where I'm like, even reading this book, the level of rigor in
Mm.
this book, I can pull back to, I'm like, this girl know how to make a lesson plan, okay? Because between, listen, this backwards plan, there's I do, we do, you do. Like, it is so clear the level of rigor in this book that it is clear how your zone of genius intersects with your background of being able to be on the front line serving kids. And I'm just so incredibly grateful for the conversation that we've been able to have and you sharing your expertise with our audience. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, good people. Oh, I need to see the comments. Like, what did you think from this episode? What did you take away from the episode? Let me know in the comments your takeaways, your ahas, and if you found this episode to be really helpful. I got 2 requests for you. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. And then secondly, I want you to share it with an educator friend because we are on a mission to make sure that Seven Figure Educator is not the best kept secret. And we want to ensure that as many educators as possible have access to a freedom blueprint through building a 7-figure education consulting business. We will see you back here on the next episode of the 7 Figure Educator podcast. Bye now.